Morning, fourth graders. I hope you guys are having a good morning so far. Today we're going to be doing a screencast so that you guys are able to see some things that I need to project that won't work on your iPads. So, again, we're going to be talking about reading for information. That's our objective today. And specifically, you guys are going to cite some text evidence right here in blue when explaining what the teacher says explicitly, or what the text says explicitly, and when drawing inferences. So here's what you guys are going to do today down here in red. You're going to be reading some eyewitness accounts about the Great Chicago Fire, and you're going to view some projected images, which is why I have to do a screencast because it won't work on your iPads, as you practice making inferences on a graphic organizer. So before we do that, let's build some background knowledge about the Chicago Fire. So I'm going to show you this quick video.
So in weather history between Sunday, October 8th and Tuesday, October 10th, 1871, 4 square miles of the city of Chicago burned in the conflagration known as the Great Chicago Fire. This artist's depiction of the fire shows the view facing northeast across the Randolph Street Bridge. To date, the exact cause and origin of the fire remain unknown. However, the fire started in or around a small barn owned by Patrick and Catherine O'Leary. It was reported by the Chicago Republican that a cow kicked over a lantern but was later dispelled in 1893 as fabricated. Few factors contributed to the fire's rapidly spreading nature. Chicago's overuse of wood for construction, the drought affecting the area, and strong winds from the southwest which carried flying embers toward the heart of the city. When the fire began, the city did not react soon enough, as citizens were unconcerned when it began. Almost everything in the fire's path was devastated. After 2 days of burning, it began to rain and doused the remaining fire. Over 300 people died and over 100,000 were left homeless. On the Chicago flag, the second star commemorates the Great Fire. The rebuilding that began immediately afterwards spurred Chicago's development into one of the most populated and economically important cities in America. I'm Mark Mancuso.
Okay, so that was just a little bit more background knowledge. So for our goal today to make inferences, here's what we're looking at in terms of a rubric. So your goal is to refer to details and examples in the text when explaining what it says and making inferences. So right here, this PR section, this is what we're looking for. I want you guys to be able to explain what the text says. I want you to be able to make inferences and then find details to support your inferences. So we've been doing that all year. So you're going to be making inferences on this graphic organizer, which hopefully the sub has already passed out to you. And what we're going to be doing is taking words from the text, so here's your text evidence, talking about what you might already know, and then filling in your inference here. So in order to do that, we are going to be reading a text that looks like this. So this is the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. So I am going to be clicking back and forth between this text and then the interactive online version of this text, which only works on a computer and not on your iPad, so that we can see a little bit more about what's going on. So I'm going to be doing the first two inferences for you. So if you guys want to take a look at what we'll be reading on your graphic organizer, so the title of the text is PBS American Experience, the Great Chicago Fire. So that's what we're going to be reading. And then for the first two inferences, here's what we're going to be making inferences about. The number one says the text said it was a wonder that these huge cinders had come so far, over 2 miles. So we're going to be making an inference about the cinders traveling 2 miles. And if you don't know what cinders are going to be, kind of think of them as ashes. They're like flying ashes that are still burning from the fire. So they're going to be traveling. And then our second inference is going to be from the text evidence that says it could not have been 10 o'clock, for they were singing in the Methodist church. So this is going to have to do with something with timing, the timing of the fire. So let's do this kind of in a green color here. So we're going to be making an inference about the time frame of the fire for number 2. So let's go back and look at the text. This is the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. And what we're going to be doing is let's take a look at what the captions say underneath the illustrations or the pictures or the maps in this case. and see if we can come up with some inferences based on our graphic organizer so far. So this first one says before the fire. So I'm going to pull up the interactive map here. There is some sound to this. Okay. So this is, again, your student version that you guys will be looking at. But here is this loud version on the PBS site. So I'm going to turn off the sound and let's start reading. The Sunday morning, sun rises on 4 city blocks, destroyed by a fire that had burned through the night. The city's 185 firefighters are exhausted. In the last week, there have been 20 fires. The firefighters' requests for better equipment and more men have been denied. Their success with controlling fires has relied so far on their quick response. So this is before the fire. Okay, so let's click here, and now we can see this. So here's this interactive part. This was from Horace White, and he was an editor-in-chief from the Chicago Tribune. And he says, I was much interested to pick up large cinders about our house. We learned of the great fire that had occurred the night before. It was a wonder that these huge cinders had come so far, over 2 miles, and that they had not started other fires. So now when I go back to the map again, I'm going to look at this and think about what Horace White was saying. So Horace White was saying that he was going around his house picking up large cinders, which I told you were kind of like flying ashes, pieces of flying debris in the air. And he had heard about the Chicago fire, but he wasn't sure how these huge ashes could travel so far. So let's go to our graphic organizer, okay? And what do we already know about the graphic? What do we already know about the Chicago fire? So in this middle section, let's write, we know that Chicago is nicknamed the Windy City and that conditions were very dry in Chicago during this time. So an inference that we can make is that I can infer that it was windy on the day of the Great Chicago Fire. So this is what you guys should be copying down in your graphic organizer right now. I'm going to leave this up for a second so that you can finish copying it. Okay, so let's go back to the map and let's go to 8:30 to 10 o'clock p.m. So on the night of the fire, this is 8:30 at night. And this would be your student version that you guys would be seeing. So the interactive version is just that I can click on things now. Okay, so a fire starts in the O'Leary family's barn at DeKoven and Jefferson Streets. A watchman spots the fire from the courthouse tower, but locates it near Canalport in Halstead. Realizing the error, he tries to change his report, but the telegraph dispatcher, fearing confusion, refuses. Meanwhile, a storekeeper near the fire pulls the hook on one of the city's new fire alarm boxes, but it fails to work. Just before 10 p.m., 7 fire companies arrive. Too late to control the blaze. So the other day, friends, we were wondering why the firemen had the wrong directions. And this is could be a theory to explain why there was an error in getting the firefighters to the right place. The telegraph dispatcher didn't want to confuse them, and then a storekeeper pulls the new fire alarm boxes, but it doesn't work. So that's kind of an issue. So let's take a look at this one. Joseph Chamberlain is near DeKoven and Jefferson Street. So here's what he says. I was at the scene in a few minutes. The land was thickly studded with one-story frame dwellings, cow stables, pigsties, corn cribs, sheds innumerable. That means there was a lot of them. Every wretched building within 4 feet of its neighbor, and everything of wood. So again, remembering what we've talked about with the Great Chicago Fire. Everything was made of wood. Everything was close together. And so this was just a disaster waiting to happen. Here's Alexander Freer. He was a New York alderman. He says, the wind was blowing fiercely through Clark Street to the river, and I had some difficulty in getting across the courthouse square. It could not have been 10 o'clock, for they were singing in the Methodist church. I noticed the glare of the fire on the west side. So again, the wind was blowing fiercely, so that's something to remember, through Clark Street. And he was having difficulty getting across the street. And again, this is where our text evidence comes from. It could not have been 10 o'clock, for they were singing in the Methodist church. So let's go to the third eyewitness account. So here's another person who wrote to the Chicago Tribune. In less than 10 minutes, the fire embraced the area between Jefferson and Clinton, those are the names of streets, for 2 blocks north, and rapidly pushed eastward to Canal Street. So again, here's a picture, friends, of what people were thinking the fire looked if they had an aerial view. So let's go back to our text evidence here. It could not have been 10 o'clock, for they were singing in a Methodist church. So let's go back to our graphic organizer. What are some things that we know about people that go to church or going to church? I know that churches have a regular schedule that they stick to daily or weekly. So for example, if you go to a church or a service, you might always go every week at the same time. And usually it's pretty predictable about what you would do during that hour and a half that you're at your church or your service. So something I can infer from this could be that the fire continued to burn starting before 10 o'clock p.m. So let's just say the fire, let's say, started to burn. So again, friends, you should be copying this down on your graphic organizer. So I can infer that the fire started to burn before 10 o'clock p.m. Okay, so here's where you guys come into play. So now that I've done some models for you of inferring, I want you guys to try to infer what's happening in the text or what the author is telling us for numbers 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what I'm going to have you guys do is I'm going to have you guys read this text, number 3, 4, 5, and 6. You'll have these pages to look at. And I want you to read with a partner, and I want you guys to try to come up with some inferences about what the author is explaining to us about the Chicago fire. So for number 3, you're going to be using the text evidence. It, meaning the fire, ignites the waste and oil floating on the surface of the water. So you guys are going to be making an inference about the Chicago fire. So I can infer that, or the Chicago River, excuse me. the Chicago River was, and finish that sentence. For number 4, your text evidence is soon the supposedly fireproof courthouse begins to burn. Authorities release prisoners held there. So think about this. This is the courthouse where people who have committed crimes are being housed, and it starts to burn. And so the authorities let them go. So what can we infer about the prisoners? Okay, based on the fact that there's a fire in the building. Okay, number 5, the text said men, women, and children rushing frantically in all directions to save their lives, some away, but others into traps and places where they were soon surrounded and no retreat left. So what can you infer about people that lived in Chicago during this time? So I can infer that people in Chicago, and finish that sentence. And finally, number 6 on your with your partner, the text said, although our things were saved, we sat there until I was almost blind with the dirt and cinders that filled the air. Okay, so what can you infer from this about the atmosphere that surrounded people in Chicago at that time? So I can infer that the fire caused, and finish that sentence. And then if you have time left, I would like you to try number 10. So you're going to read the section 10, and this is in the 6 o'clock p.m. to midnight section. Sorry, friends. This says, there was no sleep for us until we heard the welcome sound of rain against our windows. How our hearts did rise in thankfulness to heaven for the rain. So what can you infer about the rain? I can infer that the rain, and finish that sentence. Okay? So that's what you guys are going to be working on for the next 20 minutes or so, coming up with inferences from your partner with what you already know, and then finish these inferences here. And then when you're finished with that, friends, we'll move on. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.